Hi everybody, welcome to a surprise edition of IndyCar today. I said to people I was probably going to go online about 3 o'clock this afternoon, but unfortunately events have overtaken me and I can't do it at 3 o'clock. So what I want to do is do a dead dog party for this whole Brexit thing this morning, so that, well, not this morning, this afternoon, but so that we have an idea of where to go from here. I was on Scotland at 7 last night, as you know, interviewing Anthony, what's his surname? I always have trouble with his surname. Anthony Salmononi. I can't remember his name, I'm sorry. He's a lovely Italian name. Yeah, wait a minute. His name is Salmononi, I think. I'll check. But Anthony is a political science expert and who works with the Centre for European Relations, set up by the Scottish Government. And I was asking Anthony during his interview last night on Scotland at 7, what would happen, hypothetically, if Scotland unilaterally left the Union with England? Would the European Union accept us back in, or would we have to reapply? Now, Anthony said to me that he thought that the European Union would insist that we reapply as a new country and go through the procedure that everyone else goes through, except that because we've been members already for about 45 years, that time frame of normally about 3 years would be shortened down to approximately 1.5 years, which is roughly the amount of time it actually takes for Scotland to become independent from the Union, to leave the Union with England. Now, one of the things that I realised after the interview, and people will probably argue with me about this, but my own interpretation is this: the European Union thinks that other unions are like the European Union. They think that the UK Union works the same way as the bigger EU. And it's worth bearing in mind that that's not the case. And we can actually say to the European Union that because Scotland and England are the only two countries that are signatories to the Treaty of the Union of Scotland and England, that it's quite within Scotland's rights to unilaterally end the treaty, because there's only two signatories to this. We don't have to seek negotiations with Ireland or with Wales, because neither of those two countries has any power over this process. Ireland isn't in union with the UK. Northern Ireland is a claimed territory of the UK. Wales is a part of England now. It's been absorbed into it, and Wales would have to fight its own battles. But Scotland and England are the only signatories to the UK Union. That means it's not like a union of 27 countries. It's an agreement between two nations. So Scotland can end it. I don't see any reason why we couldn't have our own vote, our own referendum. Doesn't matter whether England agrees with it or not. And if enough Scots people say, no, we don't want to continue with the UK, we want to end the union with England and go back to being a country in our own right, and move our government fully back to Edinburgh, then that could happen. Now, the European Union might say, oh well, you know, you're a new country and you have to reapply. But we could then remind them that as a member of this partnership with England, we are already full members of the EU. We are de facto Europeans. Every Scottish person holds European citizenship. And just because we have ended an agreement with England doesn't make us any less European. And also, almost all of the laws in Scotland, in Scots law, are already in tune with EU law. We've already adopted it. It's already in place. Everything is in place. We don't have anything to change in order to continue as European citizens. So in my opinion, at least, the European Union needs to stop thinking about the UK as being like the European Union. It isn't. It's completely different. The UK Union, as it is known, is just simply an agreement between two countries. And if one country is not happy with that agreement, they can end it at any time. Under Scots law, it can be ended simply by a democratic vote to say we want it over with, and the Scottish Parliament is then empowered under Scottish law to revoke the Acts of Union, which are the legal instruments that keep it in place, and then the treaty is null and void. End of story. We are then no longer part of the United Kingdom, and we're able to stay in the European Union if we wish. We can then have a vote amongst ourselves about what kind of relationship we want to have with Europe. We could stay in temporarily while we think about it and formulate our plans and work out whether a new membership agreement is preferable to, say, being outside and using a European Free Trade Association membership as a way of trading. We might decide to do that, but at least we wouldn't be dragged into Brexit, and we wouldn't be dragged out of Europe completely by England without us wanting to go. So last night's interview on Scotland at 7 was an education for me, and it made me realise a few things about the European Union. One of the problems with the European Union is that they think that everybody else's unions are the same as theirs, and therefore they're basically trying to say that if Scotland unilaterally declared its independence from England, that somehow or other they wouldn't respect that. I think is nonsense, because when the Soviet Union collapsed in the 1980s, the late 1980s, when it began to fold up, and we had Romania, Estonia, Latvia, all the VIAs, basically, all the Eastern European countries were suddenly cut adrift, suddenly to become independent. Now, did the European Union at that point insist that places like Poland and Latvia and Lithuania, did they insist that those countries got permission and agreement from Russia before they became independent? I don't remember them doing that. I don't remember the European Union saying, I'm sorry, you can't get into Europe unless you ask Russia's permission and negotiate with them to become independent. I don't remember that happening, and I'm pretty sure it didn't happen. So they can't apply this different standard to Scotland. They can't say, oh, well, Scotland can't come into Europe because you haven't negotiated your exit from the UK with England properly, you haven't got their agreement. We don't need to get their agreement. This isn't the European Union. We don't have to get the agreement of 27 other countries to do something. We are a country with an agreement with one other country, and if we don't like that agreement, or that agreement is no longer serving our interests, or in fact is working against our interests and it's harming the country, then we're quite within our rights to end it. There is no legal impediment to Scotland ending the Union at all. We could quite easily have a perfectly democratic vote of all, 4.2 million people that are registered to vote in Scotland. And remember, 2 million people recently signed a petition saying they wanted to remain in the European Union. I'm not saying that's Scottish people only, but if 2 million people can sign a petition to stay in the EU, and Scotland has voted en masse to stay in the EU at 62% to remain, then having a vote right now, within the next few weeks, regardless of what happens with Brexit, is perfectly legal and legitimate. We can have that vote, and our own Parliament, which is legally sits in Edinburgh, works with Scots law, which is separate from English law. Remember, there's no British law, there's no UK law, they don't exist. Scots law and English law, neither one trumps the other. They both work in their own domains. So in Scotland's domain, if Scotland decides to go to the people, and the people of Scotland vote as a majority, right? So as I say, there's a turnout of 4 million, and 2.2 million people vote to leave the UK and to end the Union, then that's what we would do. The Scottish Government can then ratify that decision and repeal the Acts of Union and adopt the new constitution, and thereby construct or create the newly re-emergent Scotland, which would take about 18 months to separate ourselves from England and to negotiate things like the return of all our territorial waters, our mineral rights, the oil revenues, the gas fields, all the rest of it, all of the infrastructure of Scotland, which is currently being taken advantage of by our neighbours, would return to us. That would take about a year and a half, and during that year and a half we can negotiate our re-entry into the European Union like a penguin through a trapdoor, because Scotland is already a member. We already exceed all of the standards the European Union asks for. In fact, we're ahead of the game in many of them. We're setting the standards for environmental protection, and for the planning of green industries, the reduction of carbon. Nobody talks about that. The European Union should be begging us to come back in, not saying you have to negotiate with England. Anyway, that's about all I wanted to say today, and I have been bursting with enthusiasm to talk about this since last night, because speaking to a political science expert like Anthony and asking him all these awkward questions about what's possible and what's not possible about Mrs May's deal led me to believe that Brexit is going to be bad no matter what happens next. If Mrs May's deal succeeds, it'll be bad. If Mrs May's deal doesn't succeed, it'll also be bad, but it'll be much worse if nothing can be decided before the 12th of April. And let's face it, the government's taken 3 years to get to the point that it's at now. Can you imagine what it could achieve by the 12th of April? I don't think it would make it. I think it would end up with a hard Brexit with no deal, and with this bunker in England under Whitehall that the newspapers are telling us has now been activated by the Ministry of Defence so that the civil defence arrangements can be made to cope with the logistical fallout from a no-deal Brexit. We don't need to take part in any of that. In fact, the whole idea of continuing on this ridiculous madness could be ended within a few days by simply going to the people in Scotland and saying, do you want to be ruled by this shower down there in this other country that are about to wreck your economy for no good reason and about to trash your jobs and leave you all out on the streets, close down your factories and cause your whisky exports to collapse? We've already seen American whisky exports contracting by 11%, okay, since the Americans closed their doors to foreign imports. So if America shuts the door and instantly its whisky exports are cut by 11%, imagine what will happen to Scotch whisky if we cut our own throats by going with Brexit. Okay, so basically my argument is this, that UDI, which people talk about as being a big bogeyman, in our instance, UDI is not necessary. What is necessary is for us to vote on what to do. And then we can vote on what to do and have an advisory vote in Scotland, and it doesn't matter if people in London don't like the result or refuse to abide by it. They can't do anything about it because they're not bound by Scots law. But we are, and our law says that we can do that. Our law says that this is the legal position, this is the settled will of the Scottish people. And if we decide that we want our politicians and our lawmakers to end the union with England, then we can do that. There's only 2 countries signed up to this, remember. We don't have to ask permission from the EU to do this. And a Section 30 order is not a permission. A Section 30 order was just an agreement for both sides to respect the result of the vote. We can still have the vote. England can completely contest the result of the vote until they're blue in the face, but it doesn't alter the fact that we can end that union and that we can write off that treaty as null and void under Scots law. And let them try and take us to court. What court are they going to take it to? Because if they go to the European Court of Justice or they go to the United Nations is going to uphold the right of Scots to self-determination. They're not going to say you have to ask permission of the occupying country to let you go, because England's exploiting Scotland's resources. They've colonised Scotland for their own use. The United Nations already defines it that way. So I can't see there's any risk to this. And it's not UDI. We're not unilaterally declaring independence. What we're doing is just ending an agreement. And agreements end all the time. Every day, agreements come to an end. Businesses fold. Agreements collapse. People agree to differ. There are settlements. And that's all this would be. The European Union needs to get a grip on things and realise that Scotland and England are not like the European Union. It's a completely different union. For one thing, it's a 300-year-old agreement that was made basically to bring together 2 crowns so there was one monarch, and to stick 2 parliaments together in one place so that they were operating together. It was not ever intended to be the colonisation of Scotland by England, nor was it meant to be the exploitation of Scotland by England. And it certainly was never imagined. I don't think they imagined that it would end, because the British state as it became wouldn't let it end, because they were having such a good time spending all the oil money. But the point is that legally there's no reason why Scots can't end it. And I don't see any reason whatsoever to have an indyref too. I think we should just have a vote, our own vote. We can do it electronically if we like, but we'll have our own ballot. And the result of that ballot, if it's a yes vote to end the union, then we just end the union. And we tell England that we've had it, we're out. Do your Brexit, have fun, enjoy yourself as a closed nation, but we're having no part of that. We will then go back to the European Union and say, we're still Europeans. What terms are you going to give us now that England has left Europe and we are remaining? Because remember, it's not us that would be leaving the EU then, it would be England. Scotland would be, to the European Union at least, the remainder of the UK. We would be the rest of the UK. So we would become the successor state to England when it leaves Europe. And this is why we have to start looking from the other end of the telescope now. Instead of looking at ourselves as being the underdogs, we have to remember that we are the ones who have all the resources. We're the ones with the big exports. We're the ones with the manufacturing industries. We're the ones attracting all the investment. We have the oil, the coal, the gas, the tide, the wind, the fish, the tourism, the science, the engineering, the shipbuilding, the bus building, you name it, we've all got it. And to European unionise Scotland is a glittering jewel that it really needs to keep. England is a bad debtor. It lives its entire life based on borrowing money from other people's banks to bankroll the debt from the previous year. That's why the debt's so high. That's why the deficit got so high, because England just keeps borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. It's living on phantom money. It's living on money that's been created, fiat money as they used to call it, imaginary capital that's been created to fund the continuation of the English economy. But the English economy is based on nothing but thin air, promises and credit, nothing else. There's very little there. Okay, that's my rant over for today. But my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm a driving instructor and a part-time television interviewer, but my opinion looking at this is the European Union have got this wrong. Scotland isn't in a union with England. Scotland just has an agreement with England, has a treaty. The treaty can be ended at any time by anybody, by either side. I mean, the Americans have pulled out of treaties already, haven't they? They were in treaties with all sorts of countries, and they've just broken them off. They haven't said, do you mind if we break off this treaty? Or please, 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 can we break off this treaty? They've just broken the treaty. They've just said, nope, it's over. You want a nuclear proliferation treaty? Well, I'm sorry, we don't want it anymore. End of story. It stops now. And that is all there is to it. We just have to say no to the Union and say yes to being a country again. And really, that's all there is to this. The European Union will have to accept it, because Scotland will be the last part of the UK that's still European. We'll be the survivors. We'll be the European survivors. We should be welcomed with open arms by the European Union, not made to jump through hoops of agreement with England over this. And let's face it, England and the European Union are hardly the best of buddies at the moment. Anyway, I have to go to work and do some real work now, but think about it, and just think about whether we actually need any kind of permission slip from the English government to have a vote on our own future, because the Claim of Right says otherwise, and the Declaration of Arbroath definitely says otherwise. We have got two founding documents which give Scots the sovereignty to decide their own future. We don't need anybody's permission. We've never, ever needed anybody's permission to do what we want to do. We've always been free. And if Wallace died for anything way back in the day, then it was for this. It was for this freedom to decide what we want to do. I mean, he died fighting to free Scotland from English rule and domination. And then we had his successor, Bruce, doing exactly the same thing. But Bruce did something more, and it's worth remembering that Bruce founded a country which gave the sovereignty to its own people, not to a monarch, not to another country, but to the people. And because of that, we will always have the right to decide what we want to do. And nobody can take that away from us. And no union of European states can gainsay it, because it's our law that governs it, not theirs. It's our law that tells us what we can do. It's our law which states that we have the power to take ourselves out of this union with England and to end it at any time we feel it's no longer in our interest to be in it. We just have had these facts hidden from us for 3 centuries. They've been buried in some dusty pile in Westminster's library to make sure that we don't remember that we can do this, that we never find out that our historic documents give us this right. But nobody can put that genie back in the bottle now. It's out. They can't stuff it back in. We now know, we remember, we've woken up, and like Sleeping Beauty, we have woken up, and now the entire kingdom is waking up. So it's time that we stopped asking permission from people to do things. If you want to be free, then you need to take your freedom. You don't have to run about the streets with pitchforks and burning torches, but you do need to get up there and vote. And I expect Nicola Sturgeon, who has hinted that she is going to clarify or update her position on independence within the next 2 or 3 days, I would expect her to keep being cagey about it at the moment, but I certainly would be, if I was in the SNP, I would certainly be planning to have a vote. And it's not going to be a Section 30 indyref run by the British government and its electoral bodies, because we know how easy that is to rig. We'll have it here, we'll vote ourselves, and whatever the decision is, we will action it. If we decide not to leave the UK, fine, but let's make the decision ourselves. See you all later. Bye for now.